Welcome to OpsTok, the podcast where we explore the intersection of operations, technology, and business excellence. With your hosts Sahand and Tom. Presenting special guest Vishal Kaushal. Expert in business and growth strategy, supply chain transformation, logistics cost optimization, warehousing process improvement, forecasting and planning, sourcing and procurement, e-commerce supply chain, transportation sourcing, and logistics network optimization.
Hey everyone, and welcome to OpsTok, the podcast where we explore the intersection of operations, technology, and business excellence in manufacturing, logistics, supply chain, and industrial companies, featuring interviews with highly accomplished operators and owners with your hosts, Sahand and Tom. Today, we are super excited and honored to have Vishal Kaushal with us. Vishal is an expert in supply chain with experiences across the globe. He started his career in e-commerce supply chain with Amazon and has been in consulting for the last many years. Super excited to have you. Thanks for joining us, Vishal.
Thanks, Sahant. Thanks, Tom. Great chatting with you guys, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Awesome. So we are super excited to talk about supply chain. I know you have lots of experiences across many different countries. So maybe you can get us started by just sort of telling us a little bit about your experiences, and then we'll jump into some of the fun questions we have for you related to how things are going, how the future looks like, and of course, AI is on everybody's mind. We'll talk a little bit about AI too, and take it from there.
Sure. I'll probably start from the very start. I'm an engineer by training, a chemical engineer. Did my master's thereafter from US in supply chain. Started my career with Amazon back in the day when they were not that big a mammoth that they are today. But it was a great experience working with them in supply chain and the way their thinking works, especially when it comes to the end customer, and how supply chain is basically a crucial backbone in the entire operation. So I was with Amazon for close to 2 years, moved back to India, joined consulting thereafter. And I've been in consulting for the last 12 years or so, primarily within supply chain consulting. But that said, I've also done a fair bit of strategy, market entry, growth strategy across the globe. Did a lot of work with clients in Asia, a lot in North America, a few clients in Australia and Europe as well. So I would say I've gotten a good global perspective when it comes to supply chain and how things or the thinking varies within the whole supply chain domain when it comes to geography, and it does play a crucial part in the whole operations.
That is awesome. And I know previously we had some chats about this. Like, what are some of the big trends that you see now? I know it was a few years back, your experience in Asia, now more North America. What are some of the big differences you see, in terms of, I guess, use of tech, the cultural aspect, everything? It's just curious to hear about your global perspective on that.
Sure. Well, supply chain has been the buzzword. I would say everyone who didn't know what supply chain was came to know because of COVID, right?
That's right.
Because of all the lawmakers using this word the most, everyone started reading a bit more about it and became the buzzword. But that said, there's a pre-COVID and a post-COVID scenario of supply chain, right? I would say when it comes to North America, things are much more leaning towards connected supply chain now than they were earlier. If I compare it to the developing economies, especially in Asia, if I have to pick an example, for example, a thing like supply chain control tower, right, which kind of gives you the end-to-end visibility. The clients in Asia were talking of that thing and implementing that back in 2015, 16. That started happening in North America, I would say, closer to 2020 and more so in a post-COVID world. So that's, I would say, a big difference between North America and Asia. Asia, I would say, when it comes to supply chain, has been, if not more, 3 to 4 steps ahead, both in terms of innovation as well as in terms of implementation. When it comes to trends, I think as you rightly mentioned, AI is something that's everyone has everyone talking, and everyone's curious to know more about it and its implications on supply chain. But then there are other aspects when it comes to EVs, for example, unmanned electric vehicles. So air mobility, if you ask me, is going to be one of the key trends. And this is purely a personal opinion. Uh, Air mobility has got a lot to contribute towards logistics, especially when it comes to last mile logistics. There's been a fair bit of work that's been done more in North America than in Asia when it comes to unmanned EVs, more so from an air mobility perspective. So that's one area where North America is way ahead in terms of innovation, in terms of implementing the pilots. Also, I would say at the start of COVID, drone delivery for pharmaceuticals, especially for senior homes. There were a lot of trials done in the US as well. And that's why I feel it's very, very important to have a national air mobility strategy or a roadmap right now. I'm maybe mixing too many things here, but when it comes to trends, I would probably pick air mobility as one of the key trends within logistics in the next 10 years. I think that will change the landscape a lot than what we have right now. And also with regards to the unmanned electric vehicles, especially in the logistics space, more so in last mile.
Yeah, which I think that's really interesting about the last mile, because with Amazon, right, with the e-commerce, it totally changed the whole structure of the supply chain, and that whole last mile delivery is changed. I know in the U.S., the post office, the U.S. post office was struggling, and then with e-commerce, all of a sudden they were the perfect solution for that last mile delivery, right? And you saw that business grow. And it's interesting you bring up air mobility, because actually Sahan and I worked on a project with using a drone, but what we ran into there was the FAA rules about autonomous flight.
Right.
Yeah, do you have any information you can share with us on where do you see that going in the future? Is it going to be more relaxed, or is it the technology going to get better to stay within the frameworks of the FAA?
Right. I think from a regulation perspective, if you ask me, it's still at a very nascent stage. The lawmakers are also trying to get a better grasp of the situation, mold their rules and regulations basis the usability of the end product, right? So I think we're going to see more and more relaxation within those FAA rules and otherwise coming into play in the next 3 to 4 years. I think more than anything, that's going to become a prerequisite when it comes to servicing the logistics sector, right? Especially from a cost perspective as well. So that's going to be one of the key parameters, I would say, when it comes to air mobility. Also, I would say there are a fair number of startups that are doing groundbreaking work in this space, right? And they are the ones educating the government bodies, the lawmakers, as to what all this can entail, or what all this can service, and how best it can service the end customers, right? At the same time, we need to be cognizant of the negative effects it can bring in with regards to privacy and breach of data and all of those aspects, right? But I think if the technology is used in the right manner with the right checks and balances, I think there's a very, very good business case that we would have in front of us in the next 3 to 4 years. And to your question, I think we'll definitely see some relaxation coming in as more and more companies start to make a stronger business case for this, and it becomes more of mainstream rather than what it is right now.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider also is that I think we're just at the perfect storm place with air mobility is the data connectivity too, especially in remote areas.
Right.
I know we're talking about last mile, but especially in Canada, the US is the same way in some areas, that is just sort of the coverage of cellular network or a network to connect the drones may just not be up to par. But I think with the rollout of 5G and the next
Absolutely.
generations, it's just getting better and better for this, right?
Absolutely. And add to it the whole layer around sustainability, right? What we are wanting to do with regards to the carbon footprint, and how this becomes a very plausible alternative to the mainstream, right? Making sure that we are working on the sustainability aspect of things as well, right? I think it's going to be a win-win for all the parties concerned.
So along the sustainability, I'm really curious on what's the future trends in the supply chain, because there's a lot of buzzwords talking about reshoring, nearshoring, and a lot of it was because of COVID, right? Supply chains were disrupted, we couldn't get our items. But now that we've moved past that, do you still see, because to me it was always a sustainability issue, is if we manufacture in one part of the world, what's the carbon footprint of shipping it all around the world? Now I know some things we still have to do that, but
Right.
it seemed like there's a lot of value to lower the carbon footprint by manufacturing things nearer to the end user. Is that a trend that you see along sustainability, or is the nearshoring, reshoring just buzzwords? Are you actually seeing any companies or any movements in that area?
My perspective on that, Tom, would be when it comes to aspects such as nearshoring, you would have many stakeholders other than just supply chain, right? For a country to nearshore their supply chain, right, they need to make sure that the manufacturing environment is conducive to manufacture those products. They have the labor, they have the raw materials, they have the expertise, the manufacturing setup, all the paraphernalia, right? Not just supply chain. So supply chain is just one aspect of the whole puzzle in there, right? So the stakeholders are many more than just supply chain. So I would say nearshore did become a trending topic right after COVID, but we have not, I would say, had that gone to the next step in terms of implementation, right? Because for any country, for that matter, to set up a manufacturing base, right, it is a 3, 4, 5-year timeline project, right? It's not that we'll think of having the whole semiconductor industry in Canada today and we'll have it by next year, right? A lot of things go in the background, raw materials, expertise, R&D, right? So everything needs to come together for that. So to answer your question, I would say that's definitely not a trending topic today. What most of the companies are looking at is making sure from the ESG perspective, for sustainability, they have a much closer look at the entire value chain when it comes to sustainability of supply chain, be it their suppliers, their tier 1 suppliers, their tier 2 suppliers, and also the SNG play a much bigger role now than they did 3 or 5 years ago, right? So we're seeing more of that, even if there's a fair bit of offshore work still happening, but there's a much closer look that the companies are keeping on their offshore suppliers as well.
That's great. So wanted to, because sort of you mentioned air mobility as one of the, unmanned last mile delivery. I want to get your thoughts on what is sort of some of the specific, to the extent that you have and can share, some of the specific concepts and startups that get you really excited being in this field and kind of seeing the evolution over the years. Are there some dominant players that you think are are really interesting and doing some really interesting stuff, or is this a diverse number of startups and big companies are kind of working on similar problems in different parts of the space, like some in chip manufacturing, some in some job shops and how to get the raw material or chemical plants. What gets you excited?
I think when it comes to air mobility, there is a very diverse set of startups that are cropping up today. That said, without getting into the specifics of the names of startups, right? Most of them are leaning towards the last mile side of things, right? One way or the other, directly or indirectly, be it from the raw materials perspective or be it from the end customer's perspective, partnering with the likes of Amazon or other e-commerce companies in different parts of the world. What we are seeing is the actual implementation or the pilots have a much stronger business case in more densely populated areas. That's why you'll hear in the news more of stuff happening in APAC, the Asian countries, when it comes to doing the pilots, whereas the development or the software aspect of things is being handled more in North America, right? So I think it's a good mix right now. We have. I do foresee a fair bit of consolidation within this sector also happening, because right now it's still at a very initial stage. It's trying to find its feet, trying to set it up itself as an industry vertical or a sub vertical within the transportation industry. If we look at mobility as a vertical, right? I would say in the next 3 to 5 years, it will have a much stronger footing as to what it can offer to the end customer as well as to the industry, right? And you rightly mentioned that there's the raw material aspect of things, right? Not only servicing the e-commerce industry, and then you have this whole aspect of people in remote areas. How are they serviced, right? For example, if you gave the example of USPS, right? If USPS is to service a remote area today, right? They do spend a lot of dollars doing that, making sure that they have the physical infrastructure, they have the requisite number of people closer to that town, right? Are we going to replace that fully? No, right? Are we going to do a cost optimization on that basis air mobility? Probably yes, right? So I think that stronger business case would become more clear in the next few years.
Okay, so the air mobility, the last mile problem that a lot of the larger players in this space are solving is on the one side, and I don't know how much exposure you have to some of the smaller players, like and I don't know how to describe it. I mean, you correct me because you know the space a bit more. But let's say a trucking company that has, like, I don't know, a fleet of 30 or 10 to 30 trucks on the road. How do you see the evolution of that section of the market, technology adoption or process, whatever it might be? Do these new trends impact those kinds of companies as well, or is it really at this point targeting the larger entities that can afford the R&D expenditure in tech?
It does affect everyone in the whole value chain, but in a different way, right? To your question, the trucks aren't going to go anywhere, right? There'll always be trucks moving on the roads. We're not going to, and this is purely my personal view, right? I don't think that one area of logistics will replace the other entirely, right? So it's not that the freight companies, the trucking companies will be out of business. What is happening within that subsector of logistics is that this particular, if we take trucking as an example, right? Logistics or trucking in particular wasn't known to be the most tech savvy business historically, right? Or traditionally. It was more human centric, more people to people relationships, right? Now what has happened is, as the end customer, I want to have the complete visibility from the moment my package leaves Amazon warehouse, when it reaches Canada, when it reaches Toronto, when it is picked for delivery, who's picking it up, and when can I expect it to be delivered at my doorstep, right? Now, in order to service me as the end customer, invariably, the freight company would also need to get more tech savvy. They would need to do a lot more digital adoption, right? It's become a prerequisite for them, a must have rather than good to have, right? Although being forced by the end customer like you and me, right?
Right.
Because as customers, we want complete control of where our package is. And it's not only true for e-commerce, right? Be it when there are big companies dealing with raw materials, right? So if I am an automobile manufacturer today in Canada, right, I would want complete visibility of my parts while they are on the waters as well, right? When it is going to be ready for customs clearance, when do I have all the documentation ready to submit to the customs clearance prior to the ship docking at the station, right? So that I don't waste any time, I don't incur any detention demurrages at the ports, making sure that the goods transfer is completely seamless, right? So I'm kind of forcing all the players in the entire supply chain to be much more tech savvy than what they were 5 to 10 years ago.
Right. And just going back to 5 to 10 years ago, I know that there was still, maybe in the larger players, but or maybe it's the manufacturers who are expecting a complex supply chain of sort of a web of raw materials to come to them, that they use technology. And I wanted to talk to you about some of the like simulation games and you know, some of ways of analyzing the supply chain, introducing you know, variability in it, maybe not to the effect of a COVID pandemic, but you know, still
Right.
wanted to take the conversation in that direction a little bit as well. What are, you know, some of the best practices that you'd seen in the past, and how they are evolving now, if you're seeing any movement in that arena? Is simulations becoming more and more used in the industry, where they already use pretty nicely and we're just incrementally seeing evolution? What are your thoughts on that?
So very valid question for supply chain ops optimization guy, right? I think
Thought so.
simulations have been the bread and butter of supply chain improvements for the longest time, right? When it comes to the tools and softwares being available, I still remember when I started my career in supply chain, we used to do a lot of simulation and what if scenarios using Excel, right? And then came the Lindo plugins, all the other plugins within Excel that would help us make much more complicated models and help do what ifs. Then came the specialized optimization tools, which would help you simulate whatever scenario you would like, right? It may be tools around network optimization, what kind of a network you should have to service the end customer. It may be tools around supply chain planning, your forecast accuracy, your supply planning, right? Personally speaking, if I have to give an example, network optimization is one area which I've worked with a lot. And within that, there have been plenty of simulation tools, which will help you simulate the entire network. So for example, if I am a CPG company today, right, I work through my set of distributors. Now to service a country like Canada, how many distributors should I have? And what should be the locations of those distributors? What will be most optimal in terms of my service delivery as well as my cost, right? So for example, if I want my service delivery not to go less than 98%, and at the same time also optimize my cost, there are simulation tools in the market which will help you do that analysis, right? I would, to get to the actual output, I'll need to plug in my actual demand units and where those demand units are, where my supply units are, what kind of transportation infrastructure I have, what's the as-is cost structure I have, right? So once I have these details, I'll be able to simulate it in a pretty good fashion, right? This used to happen a lot more in isolation, I would say up to 5 years ago. We, as consultants also, we were doing a lot of network optimization projects for clients globally, where we'll go in, look at their supply chain network, see how best we can reduce any supply chain cost while also maintaining or doing better on the service level. In the last 5 years, simulations for network optimization have been clubbed with regards to the overall digital supply chain, which is where the connected supply chain bit comes in, right? So rather than simulating one aspect of your supply chain, you are looking at it in entirety, right? You're not looking at in isolation. That said, the tools that you are playing with today would still give you that liberty. If I have to change only one aspect of supply chain, I can still do that, right? But with the wide variety of tools, simulation tools, softwares that I have today, I can see the overall change in the network, be it from a planning perspective or from a fulfillment perspective at the same time, right? And it would also go down to the nitty-gritties of if I am to manufacture, let's say 10,000 parts more every day, what would my productivity be vis-a-vis what it is now? How do I make sure that I am optimizing my carbon footprint of all the electricity I am using to come up with the most optimal parts to be manufactured, right? And taking into cognizance all of this, what should be the most optimal number of warehouse staff I should have? What should be the most optimal number of people I should have in Schedule A, Schedule B, Schedule C, right? Depending on when my deliveries are to go out, when the trucks are to line up, right?
Wow.
So everything is so interconnected today. If I am to do this in isolation, I would, rather than helping, probably confuse the network a bit more, because it will have a ripple effect downstream and probably upstream as well to some extent, right? So it's best done in entirety right now, I would say, and see how any change in the network would affect your OPEX or your CapEx, because that's what it boils down to at the end of the day, right? That's what most of the companies are concerned with. Right.
Makes sense. And the CapEx being additional warehousing, right?
Yes.
Additional equipment.
Right.
And so it's a balance, optimizing those two.
Exactly. Capacity utilization is something that's measured the most, right? Be it the trucks you are running, be it the warehouses you are running. If I am not doing a proper capacity utilization, I'm letting my capex sit for nothing, right? So I want to minimize the that scenario in all possibility.
Now, for smaller companies or like smaller trucking companies, how do you see them competing with this technology? I'm thinking of the mom and pop shop, local regional carrier, and then how do they stay relevant in these more connected supply chains? Because in my experience, I work with some local trucking companies, and it's a huge business, right? There's a lot of them. It's a transportation is huge, but I see them, struggling with the technical side. And like you mentioned before, they're not traditionally a tax-heavy part of the industry.
One of the most fragmented industries is transportation, right? The number of owner operators will be a big factor. Who are the actual owners of the trucks and are driving, right? And then you will have much smaller companies who will have, let's say, 3 trucks, 5 trucks, right? It varies a lot from geography to geography, right? What you would see is most of these smaller companies are working with a broker, a middleman, who is then tied to a much bigger transportation company, right? So when we say a transportation company has 150 trucks, they do not necessarily own those 150 trucks, right? They'll have many smaller owners who will have 3 trucks, two trucks, 1 truck, 5 trucks, right? So all of them will be contracting for this company A in that scenario. What has changed with regards to the smaller business owner in transportation industry is that in the last few years, there's been a fair bit of demand from the e-commerce side, right? And the owner operators have been doing fine, right? Because the biggest crunch in the market right now is the driver availability, right? So as long as you are the owner and you are operating your own truck, you'll still be a bit positive as that one truck fleet, right? But the day you multiply your number of trucks and you start hiring people, there would come a point that you would end up spending more, right? So what's that optimal number in the whole scenario of workforce imbalance in terms of the number of people available to hire, right? So that's the biggest challenge the industry is grappling with. And the other big challenge is a lot of these smaller truck owner companies, right? The next generation is not necessarily entering the business, right? So if you talk to a guy who's 55, 60, he's been an owner of a trucking company, has 10 trucks. Their kids do not necessarily want to get in the trucking business, right? And that's I'm seeing a lot of that with smaller companies, right? And it is having an effect in terms of the number of trucks on the roads, the number of drivers available. And that's one of the main contributing factors as to why some of the smaller companies are struggling, right? At the end of the day, it's kind of getting down to driver shortage. In North America more so, North America and Europe more so. But even in developing economies as well, when I talk to folks there who are dealing with logistics, they're struggling to make profits with a fleet of anywhere from 5 to 10 trucks even, right? Because getting drivers is an issue, and even if you are able to find, you are paying them a lot that it's tough to break even. And more so if you start with a new truck, right? So add to that the vehicle loans and all of that, and now with the stronger sustainability practices being put to implementation in many countries, right? There are more checks and balances that come into play for older vehicles, right? So that's also a contributing factor that some of the older companies are going out of business, right? Although that said, there's also an opportunity of retrofitting older vehicles into EVs, right? Still at a very nascent stage, but I think there's work happening. I've also interacted with a few startups in that domain who are doing great work. They've done some pilots as well, but yet to be approved, yet to be put into practice.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
No, it's really interesting about retrofitting the old trucks with EVs because, from a environmental standpoint, that's great that we can remanufacture and reuse that, and it's just it's a great kind of example of both of them coming together, and then kind of building on that. It's almost as if the trends that are happening in the transportation industry are really pointing towards that EV autonomous truck revolution right now. I know we've seen on the media and the news of autonomous trucks making deliveries. I know the big transportation carriers that have piloted some of that technology. Why do you think we have not seen the EV autonomous trucks on the roads, a lot more of them yet? Because
multiple factors, right? I'll just name a few, but there's a lot, many factors contributing to that. One, we do not have the requisite infrastructure right now when it comes to EVs. We are still, I would say, many years behind in making sure that the physical infrastructure is there. For example, if I am to do a journey from Toronto to Vancouver in an electric vehicle today, I will be struggling. I would not necessarily make the trip in lesser number of hours than I would do in a normal vehicle than in an EV, right? So as a logistics practitioner, I'll be losing money if I'm taking more time, right? And that's going to be the ground reality if we look at the physical infrastructure, right? That's one. The other big aspect is the whole aspect of cyber, right? We're talking of EVs, we are talking of autonomous vehicles, we are talking of charging stations, but not everyone's talking of the risks it comes with, right? There's a fair bit of cyber aspect that needs to be looked at very, very closely as we ramp up more on the EV side of things, right? There needs to be much more investment and thought that needs to go in to make sure that our infrastructure is completely foolproof when it comes to any kind of cyber attacks. And if you look at it, if I'm using a charging station today, right, what's stopping it from being exposed to a cyber risk, right? Have we done all the due diligence? Have we made sure that it's completely compliant from all the aspects of IT as well as OT on the cyber side, right? I think a lot more work needs to be done on that aspect. And as more and more companies are getting into the EV space, getting into the charging stations, there are specialized companies who are working specifically only on charging stations, right? They're starting to invest more on the cyber side of things as well. And I'm pretty sure in times to come, we'll have much more advancement on the cyber side when it comes to EVs. But as of now, I think this is also one of the contributing factors, because there is this gray area in between as to what's the cyber implication on the infrastructure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cybersecurity is huge on charging stations. As the autonomous vehicles become autonomous, you want to obviously make sure bad actors don't overtake the control of those. It is a huge space, and it's just it's amazing. And it's kind of with the latest, and I'm going to take the conversation in that direction, because that's it's the fun stuff a little bit too, on very recent development in AI language models. Now, may not fully apply to supply chain and logistics businesses yet in some aspects, but as we not hand over control, but like leverage more and more automation and tools and artificial intelligence to help us run businesses better, deliver better user experiences to the customers, that impact of cyber risks becomes even more pronounced. Absolutely. Right? So that's an interesting topic and area that's going to evolve very quickly, as we've seen with the language models. Speaking of which, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Just to add there, while we're talking cyber, and I think also the traditional logistics, right? When we talk of last mile freight, if we pick our local examples as well, right? If a last mile logistics companies, for example, is making cannabis deliveries, right, and that data gets exposed, there are much more legal ramifications for a last mile logistics company in that scenario because of expose of that data, right? Because that's something you would not want as a user, right? And there have been scenarios like those in the recent past, where you are much more exposed to litigation, you're much more exposed to lawsuits by the customers, right? So if you look at it, this is also one aspect that's being forced by the end customer on the logistics companies, right? So even if you do not want to be cyber compliant, right, because of what I'm asking as an end customer, you need to be. I've had clients in the past who would tell me that, we don't have any cyber risk at all because everything's on paper, right?
Yeah.
But you can't do that anymore, buddy. right? You need to be digital, right? So even if you like it or not, right, you would need to talk about cyber once you go digital, right? There is this aspect that everyone would overlook earlier, which they cannot now, right? That's where the cyber aspect comes in a big way.
Yeah, no, that's funny you mentioned this because I've been involved, like I've done due diligence for acquisition of industrial targets, and yeah, exactly that. Yeah, we don't have any risk, and I've put it in the reports that we produce that yes, it's true. There's no risk because there's no digitization of the business, and that's one of the first areas that we should invest in to build it up. But then, of course, it comes with the cyber risk. Great. So I wanted to just get a little bit of a teaser, or just ask you what your thoughts are on some of the recent developments of large language models, in particular, and machine learning, its impact on the spaces that you're close to, if any. Just because it's just such a hot topic, would love to kind of go in that direction a little bit, and maybe sort of conclude our conversation with that as the last topic that we'll talk about. So, what have you seen exciting or interesting from a business use case in terms of using large language models within the space, if any?
More exploratory right now, I would say, especially when it comes to supply chain. If we talk of AI being one of the key topics of interest right now, and if I look at it from the industry's perspective, they want to know the implications of it on their supply chain from an exploratory discussion standpoint, right? I'm not sure if they are ready to imbibe it and implement it at this stage, because the general view I'm getting when I talk to people from various industries is it's very nascent right now, needs to develop more. They need to see more of it. They need to see more of the outputs from it and how it affects their business, right? I think the use cases that we have seen so far are more towards certain industries, not necessarily the traditional industry verticals, right? I think, but that said, many industries are now wanting to get into specific use cases when it comes to AI, right? Although there have been other technology areas which have been well adopted within supply chain, right? For example, if we pick blockchain as one of the areas, right? It has an amazing use case when it comes to sea freight, right? Especially with all the customs processes and the kind of documentation that goes into something like that. The original use case, if you look at it, was from financial institutions for blockchain, right? But then logistics industry was very quick to see the adaptability of something like this into their scenario, right? So that's where the sea freight, customs brokerage aspect of blockchain came into being. And I think the same is going to be true for AI as well, right? Where we are seeing some of the discussions happening, or exploratory discussions happening with regards to AI is on what you mentioned earlier, Sahan, in terms of what ifs, the simulations, right? I think it's going to take the simulation models a notch higher, right? We had already, I would say, moved from reactive to predictive with the help of simulations. I think I don't know what the new term will be, but it's going to definitely impact the simulation models in a big way, be it from a planning perspective of supply chain or from a fulfillment perspective of supply chain, both the aspects, right? For example, if I am to use a very, I would say, rudimentary example for that matter, right? If I am to use ChatGPT today, and if I'm doing a logistics run from, let's say, Toronto to Vancouver, it would give me, looking at my preferences, the most optimal route, the most preferred pit stops for me, right? How that is going to be embedded in my network optimization is going to be the next step, right? So that's where the implication on supply chain comes in. Right now, I'm again doing it as a standalone, right? If I'm the one driving the truck, I would ask ChatGPT, give me the itinerary, Toronto to Vancouver, where should my pit stops be the most optimal scenario, right? And I would probably pick and choose of whatever recommendation I get. The next logical step will be taking that real time and bringing it into the model, right? That will then dictate the driver on the wheel as to should they be taking the right turn next or left turn next, right? Not only from a traffic scenario, but looking at the stuff real time, right?
Right. That is awesome. And yeah, it's interesting you mentioned whatever we will call it, because ultimately it's all statistical models. Well, I'm simplifying it, but it's funny how the name keeps changing, but it's concepts from math concepts. So kids go learn math, right? But anyway, no, this is great, and we're at a good spot. This is a great note to sort of conclude our conversation on. Just wanted to say, Vishal, thanks again for making time for us. It's just, I learned quite a bit. Really enjoyed the conversation and loved it. I'm sure our audience will too. Any last questions or words or anything else, Tom, on your mind?
I just really want to say thank you. It was actually very inspiring to talk about all these concepts of air mobility, AI, autonomous vehicles, and I think the future is very, very exciting. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed the discussion here. And for the audience, I'll just say that supply chain is a great area. It's stood up a lot during times. I would say if I talk of the geography we are in, right? I think the logistics industry did a really good job in terms of servicing the customer during the COVID years, the bad times, right? Making sure that we are being serviced with whatever we are wanting, right? So I think the industry does stand up whenever it's required. It's just that we need to keep on supporting it in the times to come as well. But it's been a great pleasure talking to you guys.
Thanks so much. It's great. Thank you, Vishal. And
Thank you.
we'll see you soon again, I hope.
Thank you. Likewise.